Tito Mboweni. You know him. You've seen the tweets, the cooking videos, maybe even heard Casper Nyovest's song. But what we're diving into today is the legacy beyond the memes. Because this man, who we sadly lost recently, was a force in South African economics and politics like few others.
Absolutely. And doing this deep dive feels especially important now to understand the full impact he had.
Right. It's easy to think, oh, the garlic minister, but there's so much more to unpack. So let's rewind to his roots. Mboweni grew up in rural Limpopo, which isn't exactly the typical launch pad for a finance minister, right? What was it about those early years that might have put him on this path?
It's fascinating how much those early experiences seem to echo through his whole career. Imagine a young Mboweni in rural Limpopo seeing firsthand the inequalities, the lack of opportunities. These weren't just abstract ideas to him, they were the reality for his community.
And those experiences, you could argue, fueled his drive to change things.
Exactly. We see it later in his passionate work with labor unions fighting for worker rights, for economic justice. It's like those early years planted a seed that just kept growing.
That's such a powerful connection. But it wasn't just the local experience that shaped him, right? He studied economics overseas at the University of East Anglia. That must have added a whole other layer to his thinking.
Absolutely. That international exposure is crucial. He wasn't just looking at South Africa's problems in isolation. He was engaging with different economic models, global viewpoints. It gave him a broader perspective that's clear in his policies later on.
So we've got this really interesting blend of local roots, global influences, and a deep understanding of the challenges facing everyday South Africans. And that brings us to this pivotal moment. 1994, post-apartheid South Africa, Nelson Mandela becomes president, and who does he choose as the country's first ever Minister of Labor? Tito Mboweni. Talk about stepping onto the world stage at a critical time.
It was a truly historic moment. The country was in this incredibly delicate transition, dismantling decades of apartheid and trying to build a new, more equitable society. And Mboweni was right there in the thick of it, tasked with shaping labor policies that would impact millions.
And he didn't shy away from those tough decisions, did he? Can you give us a sense of the challenges he faced as Minister of Labor?
Imagine this. You have to create a labor system that's fair, that protects workers' rights, but also encourages investment and economic growth in a country still grappling with the legacy of apartheid. It was a balancing act, to say the least, and required navigating complex political and social dynamics.
That's putting it mildly. And it wasn't just about navigating existing systems, right? He was instrumental in creating new ones, shaping labor laws from the ground up.
Precisely. One of his key contributions was the Labor Relations Act of 1995. Now, without getting too into the weeds, this act established collective bargaining rights, set up procedures for resolving labor disputes, and essentially laid the foundation for a more balanced and democratic workplace.
So he's leaving his mark on these foundational pieces of South Africa's new landscape. But his journey in public service isn't in there, does it? He goes on to become the governor of the South African Reserve Bank, which is like the big leagues of economic policy, right?
Exactly. This is where his commitment to fiscal discipline, to controlling inflation and stabilizing the economy really comes to the forefront.
Okay, so we're talking about Tito Mboweni, governor of the South African Reserve Bank. What does that actually mean for people's lives? Like, what was he trying to do with that kind of power?
That's the key question, right? Because economics can seem so abstract. In Mboweni's view, a stable economy wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about creating the conditions for people to thrive. His focus on fiscal discipline, basically being really careful about government spending, was all about controlling inflation.
Because out of control inflation, that's when prices skyrocket and suddenly your money is worth less and less every day, right?
Exactly. It hits ordinary people the hardest. So Mboweni was known for making tough calls, sometimes unpopular ones, to keep inflation in check. He saw it as essential for long-term economic growth.
So he's not afraid of a challenge. And that's definitely a theme, because he takes on the role of finance minister not once, but twice fictitious. And these weren't exactly smooth economic waters, were they?
Not at all. He was finance minister during the global financial crisis of 2008 and then again during the COVID-19 pandemic. Talk about trial by fire.
You're telling me. Okay, so what were some of his key moves as finance ministers, especially during those really turbulent times?
But one of his big focuses was trying to reduce South Africa's national debt. This was something he hammered on consistently, arguing that too much debt would stifle economic growth in the long run.
And how did he go about trying to reduce that debt? Because that can't be a very popular thing to do, right?
It's never easy. One of his strategies was to try to control government spending, which often meant making tough decisions about where to allocate resources. He also focused on trying to boost revenue, encouraging investment, and trying to stimulate economic activity.
Right, so it's not just about spending less, but also about finding ways to make the economy grow faster. But, thinking about those times, the global financial crisis, the pandemic, those are huge complex issues. How on earth do you even begin to tackle something like that as a finance minister?
It takes a certain kind of mindset, that's for sure. And one of the things that stands out about Mboweni is that he was a pragmatist. He was willing to consider different perspectives to adapt his approach based on the specific challenges at hand.
So not just sticking to a rigid ideology, but being open to adjusting based on what the situation demanded.
Exactly. And that often meant making difficult, sometimes unpopular decisions. He wasn't afraid of a debate, and he would defend his policies vigorously even in the face of criticism.
And defend them he did. Often on Twitter, no less. Which, speaking of Eb, brings us to this whole other side of Tito Mboweni, the Twitter legend. Because here you have this serious economist, this seasoned politician, and then he's online sharing pictures of his, shall we say, unique cooking style.
Right. It was unexpected, to say the least. I mean, who could forget those pilchard and garlic dishes?
It was like a breath of fresh air. Here's this public figure, someone in a position of power, and he's not afraid to be himself, even if it means showing his slightly chaotic cooking skills to the world.
And people loved it. It made him relatable. It broke down that barrier between the politician and the person.
Yeah.
You felt like you were getting a glimpse into his real life, his personality.
Totally. And it wasn't just the cooking, it was the way he interacted with people online. He could be funny, self-deprecating, even a little bit mischievous. He wasn't afraid to poke fun at himself, which is such a refreshing quality in a leader.
It's true. And it's something we're seeing more and more these days, right? This blurring of the lines between the personal and the professional, especially for public figures.
It makes you wonder if that's the future of leadership, at least in some ways. Being able to connect with people authentically, even playfully, while still tackling those really serious issues.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not about being less serious about the work, but maybe being more human in how you approach it.
Exactly. And that human side of Mboweni, it came through in his cooking mishaps, his Twitter banter, but also in how people reacted when he passed away. It wasn't just a news story. It felt personal for a lot of people.
It really did. You saw tributes pouring in from all walks of life. Politicians, artists, activists, everyday South Africans, they were all sharing stories, expressing what he meant to them.
It's a testament to the impact he had, right? That he transcended those traditional boundaries of politics and economics and touched people on a personal level.
Absolutely. And I think a big part of that was his love for South Africa. It shone through in everything he did. He genuinely believed in the potential of this country, even during those challenging times.
And he wasn't afraid to challenge others to see that potential, too. I remember him saying once, South Africa is a country of enormous potential waiting to be unlocked, which honestly feels like the perfect note to end on. What do you think? What would it take for that vision, that unlocked potential, to become a reality? Something for all of us to think about, maybe even debate a little in true Tito Mboweni fashion. This deep dive may be over, but the conversation continues. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those big questions.